Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting a golden glow on the familiar chaos of our routine. Lucy, my wife of 10 years, hummed to herself as she buttered toast for our 2 kids. I watched her, a vision of ease in our shared life, and thought once again how lucky I was. "David, don't forget to pick up the dry cleaning," she called over her shoulder. "Oh, and Emma has that art show on Thursday. We can't be late this time." "I won't forget," I said, smiling as I sipped my coffee. It was our usual morning, comfortably predictable. Yet, deep down, something felt slightly off. I first noticed the change during our last family vacation. We were heading to the mountains, a trip Lucy had been unusually excited about. It was out of character for her. She always seemed more thrilled about urban getaways, with their bustling energy and boutique shopping. But this time, she insisted the mountains would be a perfect escape. It was on the drive up that the first fissure appeared. Lucy had asked to stop at a Wawa for a quick bathroom break. I stayed in the car, scrolling through emails, when her phone, left on the passenger seat, buzzed. A message popped up: "Can't wait to see you again. Counting the hours. W." Before I could process what I'd seen, Lucy came sprinting out of the store, a flustered blur of motion. She yanked the door open and snatched her phone before I could even register a reaction. "What's the rush?" I asked, half laughing, though my heart was already pounding. "Oh, I thought I left my wallet in here," she said quickly. Too quickly. Didn't want to hold up the line. Her smile was radiant, disarming. I nodded and let it go, but the moment was seared into my memory. The rest of the trip was unremarkable, save for Lucy's increasingly frequent glances at her phone. She always had an excuse: work emails, checking on the kids' schedules, or scrolling through Pinterest for dinner ideas. None of it seemed out of the ordinary, yet my gut churned. Back home, life resumed its usual rhythm, or so it appeared. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Lucy's laughter, once effortless, now felt rehearsed. She started coming home later from work, citing last-minute projects. It was plausible: she worked in a demanding role at a marketing firm, but a nagging voice in my head wouldn't be silenced. It wasn't until I saw our latest phone bill that the pieces began to fall into place. Amid the usual numbers were dozens of calls to an unfamiliar area code. I didn't recognize the number, but it appeared repeatedly, sometimes late at night, sometimes during her supposed work hours. I couldn't bring myself to confront her, not yet. Instead, I turned to the internet, where a quick reverse lookup identified the number as belonging to a VoIP account. The name on the account was William Tanner, someone I'd never heard her mention. That night, as Lucy laughed with the kids over dinner, I studied her face, searching for cracks in the facade. How many times had I told myself she would never betray me? We were a team, weren't we? Partners in every sense. But doubt has a way of growing, fed by the tiniest scraps of evidence. When Lucy left for work the next morning, I made a decision: I needed answers. Confronting her without proof would only lead to denial and arguments, and I wasn't ready for that. Instead, I reached out to a private investigator recommended by a colleague. Eric Cook was an unassuming man in his mid-50s, with a soft voice and a sharp eye. "You've got to be prepared for anything," he told me during our initial meeting. "Most people don't really want the answers they're looking for." "I need the truth," I said firmly. "Whatever it is." Eric nodded. "Then I'll find it for you." The waiting was excruciating. Days stretched into weeks, each one weighed down by the uncertainty of what Eric might uncover. Lucy's behavior grew more erratic during that time. She started wearing perfume more often, something subtle but unfamiliar. She also seemed unusually protective of her phone, keeping it face down on the counter or tucked away in her purse. When Eric finally called, I felt equal parts dread and relief. "I have something," he said. You're going to want to see this in person. The following day, I sat in Eric's small office as he laid out a folder filled with photographs. My breath caught as I flipped through them. There was Lucy, smiling and radiant, but not with me. She was in a luxury hotel lobby, hand in hand with a man I assumed was William. Other photos showed them sharing wine at a candlelit dinner, walking along a private beach, and disappearing into a hotel room. I couldn't breathe. My mind screamed for some other explanation, some logical reason why Lucy would be with this man. But the evidence was irrefutable. Eric's meticulous records confirmed the dates and locations, times when Lucy had claimed to be at work. The betrayal was a knife to the gut, but the humiliation was worse. I'd been so blind, so trusting. And now, the woman I'd built my life with was slipping through my fingers. What do you want to do? Eric asked gently. I stared at the photos, my hands trembling. I want her to feel what I feel, I said finally. I want her to understand the depth of what she's done. Eric didn't say anything, but his nod spoke volumes. It was the beginning of a plan, one that would leave no doubt about my resolve. The house was quiet the evening I returned from Eric's office, the weight of his evidence burning in my mind. Lucy was in the kitchen, humming a tune as she prepared dinner. The familiar scene felt surreal, a cruel juxtaposition to the damning photographs tucked in my briefcase. Hey, babe, she said, glancing over her shoulder. Dinner's almost ready. How was your day? I hesitated, forcing a smile. Long, I replied. But productive. I studied her as she chopped vegetables, marveling at how normal she seemed. Was this all an act? How long had she been living this double life, balancing our family with her secret rendezvous? A mix of anger and heartbreak churned inside me, but I knew this wasn't the moment to confront her. Dinner was uneventful, though I barely tasted the food. Lucy chatted animatedly about work, sprinkling in updates about her colleagues and a supposed upcoming client pitch. If I hadn't seen the photos, I might have believed her. But every word felt like a dagger, deepening my sense of betrayal. That night, as Lucy fell asleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. Confronting her was inevitable, but I wanted it on my terms. She had built her web of deceit so carefully, it was only fitting that I unravel it with precision. The next day, I began to set my plan in motion. I reached out to a few close friends, asking them to keep Lucy occupied for an evening in the coming week. It wasn't hard, she had always been sociable, and a girls' night out was something she rarely turned down. Once the date was confirmed, I began preparing for what would become the most unforgettable night of her life. The plan revolved around her upcoming birthday. Lucy loved grand gestures and parties, always relishing the spotlight. She had been dropping hints for weeks about wanting to celebrate, and I played along, pretending to organize something small and intimate. Little did she know, I had something far more elaborate in mind. Over the following days, I quietly reached out to friends, family, and even a few of Lucy's co-workers, inviting them to a surprise birthday party. The guest list grew quickly, everyone was eager to celebrate Lucy's big day. I booked a banquet hall and coordinated with a caterer, ensuring everything appeared like a loving husband's thoughtful surprise. But at the heart of the event lay a carefully planned revelation, one that would shatter her image and expose her betrayal. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal. Lucy continued her routine, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. At night, I lay awake beside her, torn between the love I had once felt and the anger that now consumed me. On the morning of her birthday, Lucy was radiant. She kissed me goodbye as she left for work, her smile as bright as ever. "Don't forget, I'm working late tonight," she said. "Big presentation for the client." I nodded, masking my emotions. "Of course. I'll see you later." As soon as she was out the door, I sprung into action. The banquet hall was a flurry of activity, with decorations being set up and food being prepared. Guests began arriving early, filling the room with excitement and laughter. Everyone was eager to see Lucy's reaction, convinced this was a celebration of love and devotion. As the clock ticked closer to the party's start time, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Despite her betrayal, a part of me still cared for her, still yearned for the life we had built together. But that part was overshadowed by the raw pain of her deceit. Finally, the moment arrived. Lucy walked into the hall, her expression shifting from confusion to delight as she took in the crowd of familiar faces. "Oh my God," she exclaimed, her hands flying to her mouth. "David, this is incredible." She threw her arms around me, her laughter ringing out as guests cheered and applauded. For a brief moment, I almost forgot my purpose. Almost. As the evening unfolded, I mingled with guests, maintaining the facade of the doting husband. Lucy was in her element, basking in the attention and praise. But as the night wore on, I noticed a subtle tension in her demeanor. She kept glancing at her phone, her smile faltering ever so slightly. When it was time for the speeches, I took the stage, my heart pounding in my chest. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions within me. "This celebration is about Lucy, her kindness, her charisma, and the light she brings to all our lives." The crowd erupted into applause, and Lucy beamed, her eyes glistening with tears. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what came next. "Lucy, you've always been the center of our family, the glue that holds us together," I continued. "Tonight, I wanted to honor you by sharing a little slideshow, a glimpse into the moments that make you so special." The room darkened, and the screen lit up with photos. At first, it was all smiles and nostalgia, pictures of our wedding, family vacations, and holidays. But then the tone shifted. The next slide showed Lucy with William, their hands entwined, their smiles unmistakable. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "David, what is this?" Lucy's voice trembled, her face draining of color. I ignored her, letting the images speak for themselves. More photos followed, intimate moments between Lucy and William, time-stamped and undeniable. The room was silent, save for the sound of Lucy's sharp intake of breath. "This," I said, my voice steady but cold, "is the truth. The truth about the woman I've spent the last 10 years loving, trusting, and building a life with." Lucy's eyes filled with tears as she turned to the crowd, her voice breaking. "It's not what it looks like. I can explain." But I had heard enough of her lies. I stepped down from the stage, leaving her to face the stunned silence of our friends and family. It was her turn to feel the weight of betrayal. I drove aimlessly for hours after leaving the banquet hall, the sound of Lucy's broken protests still ringing in my ears. I wanted to feel victorious, vindicated, even righteous. Instead, a strange hollowness settled in my chest. The years we'd spent together, the love we'd once shared, felt like a house of cards blown apart in an instant. When I finally returned home, the house was dark and quiet. Lucy's car wasn't in the driveway. I imagined she'd gone to a friend's place, or perhaps to William. The thought twisted my stomach, but I shoved it aside. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? For her to face the consequences of her choices. The next morning, I awoke to find Lucy sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and drawn. She hadn't bothered to change out of the dress she'd worn to the party. Her makeup was smeared, and her eyes were red from crying. "David," she said softly as I entered the room, "please, just let me explain." I poured myself a cup of coffee, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. Finally, I sat across from her, meeting her gaze. "Explain," I said coldly. "But make it quick. I don't have much patience left." Lucy took a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she gripped her mug. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she began. "It started as work, strictly professional. William was just a client, someone I had to impress for the sake of the company." I snorted, shaking my head. "Impress him," huh? Is that what they're calling it now? Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of pity. But then I remembered the photos, the lies, the betrayal, and my resolve hardened. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she continued. He made me feel seen, David. Like I mattered. At home, it's always about the kids, the bills, your job. I just felt invisible. I slammed my mug down, the sound echoing in the stillness. Invisible? Is that your excuse? I worked my ass off to provide for this family, to give you everything you could ever want. And this is how you repay me? Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I wasn't finished. You felt invisible. What about me, Lucy? Do you think I didn't notice you pulling away? Do you think I didn't see the way you started treating me like a roommate instead of a husband? I ignored every red flag because I trusted you. Because I believed in us. Her sobs grew louder, but I stood and walked to the window, staring out at the backyard where our kids had played just days before. My voice softened, though my anger simmered just below the surface. Do you even care what this does to them? To Emma and Jake? They'll find out, you know. Maybe not now, but someday. How do you think they'll feel, knowing their mother tore this family apart? I care, she whispered, her voice breaking. I love them. I love you. I turned to face her, my eyes narrowing. You love me. You have a funny way of showing it, Lucy. Sneaking around, lying to my face, and humiliating me in front of everyone we know. That's love. She dropped her head into her hands, her shoulders shaking with the weight of her guilt. For a moment, I thought she might beg, might plead for another chance. Instead, she looked up, her eyes filled with determination. I want to fix this, she said. I know I've hurt you, but I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I laughed bitterly. Fix this? Lucy, you can't unring a bell. You made your choices, and now we both have to live with them. She reached across the table, her hand trembling as it hovered near mine. Please, David. Don't throw away everything we've built. We can get through this. We can go to counseling, work on rebuilding the trust. I pulled my hand away, the gesture final. There's no trust left to rebuild, Lucy. You destroyed it the moment you let him into your life, and into our marriage. Her sobs filled the room as I turned and walked away, leaving her alone with her regrets. Upstairs, I locked the door to our bedroom and began packing a bag. I couldn't stay here, not after everything that had happened. I needed space, time to think about what came next. By the time I came downstairs, Lucy had composed herself, though her tear-streaked face betrayed the depth of her despair. Where are you going? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. To a hotel, I said. I'll come back for the kids later. She nodded, her gaze fixed on the floor. I'll explain things to them. You'll tell them the truth, I said firmly. No sugarcoating. They deserve that much. As I walked out the door, I felt the weight of finality settle over me. This was the end of our marriage, the end of the life I'd known. And while it hurt like hell, I knew I couldn't stay, not with the betrayal hanging over us like a storm cloud. At the hotel, I sat alone in the silence, my thoughts racing. The memories of our life together played like a cruel montage in my mind, taunting me with what could have been. But beneath the pain, a spark of determination began to grow. Lucy had taken so much from me, my trust, my dignity, my peace of mind. But she wouldn't take my future. I would rebuild, not for her, but for myself and for the kids who deserved a father strong enough to weather the storm. This wasn't the life I had planned, but it was the life I had now. And I was determined to make the most of it. The weeks following the party were a blur of cold silences, half-hearted conversations, and sleepless nights. Lucy stayed in the house, desperate to mend the rift between us. I moved between the hotel and the home, trying to shield our children from the chaos that had erupted in their once happy world. They didn't know the full truth, but kids are perceptive. They sensed the tension, the sadness in their parents' eyes, the way Lucy and I avoided each other like ghosts. I started seeing a lawyer. Lucy, despite her pleas, didn't contest the divorce. Perhaps she thought giving me an easy exit was the only way to salvage some dignity after what had happened. Papers were drawn up quickly, splitting our assets cleanly. I would keep the house for the sake of the kids, she would move out once things were finalized. The day came faster than I expected. Lucy stood in the foyer, her suitcases lined up neatly by the door. Emma and Jake clung to her legs, their cries filling the room. "Mom, please don't go," Emma begged, her little hands wrapped tightly around Lucy's arm. "I'm not going far, sweetheart," Lucy whispered, crouching down to hug her. "You'll see me all the time, I promise." Jake was less vocal but no less distraught. He buried his face in her shoulder, his small frame shaking with silent sobs. I stood off to the side, my arms crossed, my face a mask of stoic resolve. Inside, I felt like I was being torn apart. This wasn't how things were supposed to end. Lucy looked at me, her eyes pleading one last time. "David," she began, her voice trembling, "please take care of them. Make sure they know how much I love them." I nodded stiffly, unable to trust myself to speak. After what felt like an eternity, she kissed the kids goodbye and stepped out the door. Emma ran to the window, watching as her mother's car disappeared down the street. I tried to comfort her, but the tears in her wide, innocent eyes were too much. I left her with Jake, retreating to my office to sit in a heavy silence. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the routines of life resumed. Lucy found a small apartment nearby and saw the kids regularly. I kept my focus on work and parenting, burying the pain deep where it couldn't touch me. But some wounds are harder to heal. One gray November morning, the phone rang. It was unusual for someone to call so early, and my stomach twisted as I picked up the receiver. "Mr. Langston," a voice asked, unfamiliar and formal. "This is Officer Hayes with the local police department. Are you Lucy Langston's husband?" My breath caught. "We're divorced," I said cautiously. "What's this about?" The pause on the other end was excruciating. "I'm sorry to inform you, but your ex-wife was in a car accident last night. It was a single-vehicle incident. She didn't survive." The phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. A roaring filled my ears, drowning out the officer's words. I sank into the nearest chair, the weight of the news crashing over me like a tidal wave. Lucy was gone. The woman I had loved, the woman who had betrayed me, the mother of my children, gone. The next few days were a blur of funeral arrangements and explaining the unexplainable to Emma and Jake. Their small faces were etched with confusion and heartbreak. They couldn't understand why their mother, the one who had promised to always be there, was suddenly gone. At the funeral, a mixture of grief and regret swirled in my chest. I hadn't forgiven her, not fully, not yet. And now, I never would. The finality of her death was suffocating. She had been many things to me, a lover, a partner, a betrayer, but she had also been the mother of my children, and the memories of our life together refused to fade. After the service, as I stood by her grave, I felt a hand slip into mine. Emma, her tear-streaked face tilted up toward me, whispered, "Is Mommy watching us now?" I nodded, my voice thick with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart. She's watching over us." Jake came to my other side, and the three of us stood there, united in our loss. The weight of what had been and what could never be settled heavily on my shoulders. That night, as the kids slept, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the flickering flames of the fireplace. I thought about the life Lucy and I had built, the dreams we'd shared, and the ways we had both failed each other. My heart ached with the knowledge that our story had ended not with resolution, but with a cruel, unfinished chapter. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into being the best father I could be, but the shadow of Lucy lingered. The bitterness and anger I had carried began to fade, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. Her absence was a void that nothing could fill, a reminder of how fragile and fleeting life truly is. I learned, too late, that love and betrayal are not opposites, they coexist, tangled in the same messy web. And though Lucy was gone, the lessons she left behind were permanent, etched into the fabric of my being. Life would go on, but it would never be the same.